So thank you and welcome to our Open Ideas Exchange covering the NIH data sharing. My name is Angela Steiner, and I am the Director and ERA Manager for the Office of Sponsored Programs. So today we are going to go over the NIH data sharing policy that is going into effect for grant submissions effective January 25th, 2023. So any submissions on or after January 25th, 2023, this policy is in effect for. Today, I'm going to give you a high-level overview, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So if you do have questions that come up as I'm going through this presentation, please hold on to them until the end. There will be a question and answer period afterwards, and I will do my best to try to answer them as best as I can. And any questions that come up that we are not able to answer today, we will work to find those answers for you. So today we're going to go over NOTOD 21-
Angelina, can
Yes.
I just interrupt for a minute?
Yes.
A number of people didn't get the link, and
Okay.
they were standing outside 204, 205,
Okay.
and they are just now going to be logging on. So
Perfect.
I just wanted to let you know, maybe wait another, let me just see, I know who they were, and let me see.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
I don't see their names yet.
Okay.
So Yang Chow was one of them. So if we can just wait for another minute,
Definitely.
I would appreciate that, and I think they would too. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yep.
I see Yang Chow is on, so I know he was one of those people, so I
Okay.
suspect we can get started now.
Okay, perfect. Nope, not a problem. Thank you, Dr. German. Okay, so we're going to be going over NOTOD-21-03, which is the final NIH policy for data management and sharing, which is making the data management and sharing plan a requirement for NIH submissions. NOTOD-21-014 is providing elements of the NIH data management and sharing plan, and we will be going over that today as well. NOTOD-21-015 are the allowable costs for data management and sharing. And then the last one we'll be going over is NOTOD-21-016, which is selecting a repository. The last one is just if that is applicable to you, or if you're going to be involved in projects that this might be applicable for, is just supplemental information for the responsible management and sharing of American Indian Alaska Native participant data. You will get copies of these slides, and these are all hyperlinked. So you'll be able to click on these policies and read them thoroughly for yourself. So what is the NIH data sharing plan policy? Really, this represents a cultural shift in NIH. This is modeling a little bit from NSF. NSF for years has had it be a requirement that data management and sharing plans are part of the submission process and are also required as part of their reporting and updating and all of that. So NIH is really doing a big shift here, and they are aware of this and that it is going to be a shift. And really, it's the ultimate goal is to make publicly funded research available to everyone. So again, the goal is to really make this practice of data sharing cultural, to increase the availability of information, and it applies to all research conducted in whole or in part by NIH funding, resulting in scientific data. There are some funding mechanisms for which it will not be required. I believe off the top of my head, it's K awards are not required, fellowships. So again, those are all listed in the NIH policies. It details which ones that the data management sharing plan is not required. But if you're doing an R01, that will definitely be required. So it does require submission of the plan and then compliance of that plan with updated terms and conditions upon the acceptance of the award. So the NIH is updating all of their award documents. So beginning with funded proposals that have been submitted after January 25th, all of those terms and conditions are being updated. And as an institution, when we sign off on those, we are accepting that, yes, we will be compliant with these DMS plans. And really the goal is also to make sure that data adheres to FAIR principles, which is that data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So what are the elements of a DMS plan? While they are not requiring or having any sort of specific template for these plans at the time, they are giving you some parameters of what you should, considerations for these plans and what you should have included in these plans at minimum. You're looking at really 2 pages. That's it. No more than 2 pages, and hyperlinks are not allowed. So you've got to be able to put this all in roughly 2 pages or less. So really you're looking at data type. Talk about your scientific data that's going to be managed, preserved, and shared. Give a brief general summary and estimation of that data. Your related tools, software, code that's used. So any specialized tools that are going to be needed to access your data and the replication of it. What are the standards that are applied for this data? So talk a little bit about that. In terms of data preservation, access, and timelines, this is where they want you to name your repository. How will the data be findable, and when will you make it available? And then for access, distribution, or reuse considerations, this is where you're going to talk about consistency with privacy, security, informed consent, proprietary issues, access to human subjects. So again, if you're dealing with, the human subjects information and data, how will it be controlled? What are going to be the protections that follow through with this data? And will there be permissions that are required to access this data specifically? And then when you talk about the oversight of data management, this is how will compliance be monitored? Who will be in charge of it? And this is, again, this is for, not just the life of that project, but the life of that data. So again, you're looking at 2 pages and no hyperlinks. So what are some pre-award and cost considerations to consider? So DMS plan, your DMS cost should be identified and justified appropriately in the budget. If you're doing a modular budget, this is going to require an additional narrative justification where you talk about those DMS plans. For our R&R budgets, these are going to be your our standard detailed budget justification. You will want to identify individuals to help with the plan development, and we do have Dr. Robinson on this call with us from the library, and we have been working with the library and beginning to talk with them about, what does this look like for NEOMED? How can we support our researchers additionally with this additional compliance factor that's going to be involved? So, and maybe even reaching out to colleagues that are, whether at NEOMED or outside of NEOMED, that are well-versed in these plans and helping with those, with the development of these plans. Allowable costs submitted must be incurred during the performance period. This is where it gets a little bit mucky. As an example, if you have, a data management plan that you're going to need to cover that data for 10 years, you're allowed to incur that cost for that entire period, that 10-year period, even after it goes beyond that performance period, and charge it to your grant. Budget requests can't include infrastructure costs that would normally be included in institutional overhead or routine research costs. So as an example, data access fees, they would consider that routine research costs and not DMS plan costs associated. So what are some reasonable allowable costs then? Well, curating data and developing that supporting documentation. So the cost of conforming to acceptable community standards. So taking that data and making sure that it is accessible. So you can charge those costs to it. The cost of de-identifying data. Again, when you're looking at human subject information and making sure that it's de-identified, what are those costs associated with it? Preparing metadata so that it can be discoverable, and then interpretation and reuse, and then formatting of data. So all of those would be appropriate DMS costs that can be requested in your budget. And then local data management considerations. So is there going to be unique and specialized information infrastructure needed for the management and preservation of this data? Those would be allowable costs as well. And then established repositories. So the cost for establishing and selecting a repository is an allowable cost for these budgets. So, you know, data deposit fees paid out for an entire period, as I had explained previously. And I see there's been a question in the chat, so we'll hold that off until the end. So some additional pre-award considerations to think about when you're thinking about these data management and sharing plans. You want to think about your long-term storage and the archiving of your data beyond the period of performance, as that may be required. Something to note, so these plans will not be reviewed through peer review. So you will not, you will not be scored on them. However, your program staff will be looking at them. Something to keep in mind is that if your application were to be recommended for funding and the program staff member that has your application deems your DMS plan as not complete or acceptable, they will not issue that award until your plan is brought up and considered complete and acceptable. And that will happen at the just-in-time phase. So I don't recommend, you know, slapping together a plan or anything like that, knowing that I can fix it in just in time. What I would do is be as thoughtful and considerate as you can, take advantage of all the resources that are available and out there through the NEH, leaning on your peer colleagues as best as possible. Again, this is a huge shift for the NEH, they know it, and it's a huge shift for us as well. So we're all going to work through this together so that we can be successful in securing your funding and getting your continued funding and being compliant with these plans. While NEH recognizes that this is a pilot phase that they're doing, the DMS plan is required for submission, and continued funding is contingent upon that compliance with that approved DMS plan. So in thinking about selecting a repository, the easiest thing I thought was to actually take you to that policy because there are some desired characteristics that they want to see in this in the selection of your data repository. Really, and this this overarches even, you know, the cloud computing you know, access data points. So if there's any cloud computing that's involved, they want to make sure that they still exemplify these desired characteristics. And then again, making sure that they are aligned with the FAIR principles. So this is your NOTOD-21016. And it's going to talk you through, how to select a data repository. It's going to point you to some resources for data repositories, but it's going to lay out all your desirable characteristics. So, unique persistent identifiers, long-term sustainability, metadata, creation and quality assurance. And again, you're going to notice some common themes here: free and easy access, broad and measured reuse, clear use guidance, security and integrity, confidentiality, common format, and then the provenance, and then retention policy. So again, I recommend that you actually go through and read this policy for yourself, as there's a lot of good information, and I probably could have sat here and talked to you for an hour just on this alone. But sometimes it's best to, get a high level view, overview, and then go in and sort of read it for yourself, so you're taking in what's applicable to you. So with the going back, with the repository, in the future, there may be FOAs that identify a specific repository. And so for those, you will have to use that identified repository. And that might be more for not so much for the parent FOAs, but for your specific FOAs. And then you can also use a discipline specific FOA, and as sort of a last ditch effort, you can apply small data sets with PubMed Central. So some additional resources for you. The Office of Science and Technology Policy has an updated memo regarding public access to research, which is making all federally funded research accessible to the public. And this is a shift as well. Before, there have been parameters where it had to do with if you had a certain level of federal funding level portfolio, you didn't have to necessarily comply with this, but they've changed it to where any publicly funded research has to be accessible to the public, and it has to be accessible for free. And again, they're sort of working through all of these. What does that mean? What does it mean for cost? Does it mean for administrative burden? But as of right now, this is the standard and the expectation. The NIH data sharing information has a wealth of information. And there's also, they've done 2 webinars. I'm not sure how many people have participated in those webinars, but they're actually really good. And they go really into detail. And so I would recommend, if you have the time, to read those again. And for a lot of this is going to be just taking in the information constantly and consistently. I sat last month in FDP, and this was really the big topic, was the DMS and preparing for this, and what does that mean for institutions, and talking through and compliance. So I've had a week of, talking with and hearing from, NIH program staff and directors about this, and what does this mean? And it's, really that's what it's going to take. It's just taking this information in and being repetitive, and just, keep reading it again and reading it again until it sort of sticks in your mind. And then the data sharing warehouses, this lists all your repositories that are available and out there for you to use. So now I am opening the floor up for questions. So we'll start in the chat. A question that was asked is, what do we do if we can't use hyperlinks but have pages of customized code we use for analysis? So the DMS plans, if I'm understanding it, and Becky, feel free to chime in, and Dr. German, if you want to provide some feedback as well. They're not necessarily looking for that coding information at that point in that plan. They're just looking for, you know, how you're going to do it and share it. That data that you have would, so basically you would be developing a plan for that data, and you're not sharing that data in the DMS plan itself at this stage in the game. The next question we have, would this allow us to itemize costs for on-site and off-site storage of large data sets? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. So you weren't able to see, oh, Bianca, thank you. So you weren't able to see the page that I had opened. So that was NOT -21016. So that is one that I would definitely open up on your own and look over.
Will that be, but there's a link to that in the deck that we'll get, correct? All right.
Yes, yes.
So I'll ask a question that Mary has also posed in the chat, and that is that are we allowed to have these long-term costs? Are we allowed to put them in our current R01s?
So a currently funded R01.
Yeah.
So that would, you would be looking to revise your budget then, correct?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you know, it's, well, that's part of my question. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, first of all, you know, we will be expected to maintain this data set for many years. So we would want to be able to put those costs in now for the next 10 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And that kind of
That
relates
is-
to, I think, what I was asking also, which is, when do we have to start doing this? Right. So there's two things. One is we put in the plan when we put in a new proposal. And the
Right.
second thing is we start adhering to that, and adhering to it is a whole different thing that we haven't been doing. So if we have funding right now, do we have to start adhering right now? And if so, that might be additional costs that we hadn't put into our R01 that we would have been able to get extra money for if we had known that. But how do we handle that?
Yeah.
To the,
No, that's a, oh, did somebody else
To
have
the-
something?
I just, can I address that? To the best of my understanding, this needs to be in proposals that are submitted starting 2023. So stuff that may go in for the February deadline. Current R01s don't have to do this. And of course, you can re-budget. But I don't think you can go to NIH and say, I need an extra $10,000 to do this now.
Yeah, I think now this is really a journal specific set of requirements. Some journals are requiring this, and so we're going to have to do this now for this, some of this funding.
Right, but my understanding is, as far as these things for current review,
All right.
NIH has always had some data sharing. This is just getting to be much more specific and explicit about it.
Right.
Let me also remind, even though the language says this is not going to be part of the reviews, let me remind all of our people who do submit R01s that it will still be available to be looked at by your study section reviewers. And that even if it is not something that is explicitly outlined, doing this right can make your reviewers feel better about your proposal, and doing it wrong can get them irritated with your proposal. So even though it is not an explicit criterion of review, it behooves all of us to get this done right, because people will be looking at it.
And I just want to add here that if it goes the way of NSF, at the beginning, it's not part of the review, but it shifts to be part of the review. And I don't even remember when they notified us at NSF that they were doing that, but all of a sudden people were getting, getting comments in their with their comments about the data sharing plan in their reviews. So so keep that in mind, that anytime they can make that shift.
Okay, going forward, as we find investigators who've really, gotten good comments about their data sharing plan, it would be helpful if there's some way those could be distributed here to the investigators here, because we're all going to be struggling to figure out what's the right way of expressing this.
And Angelina, you may know, because I was looking things up. NIH often puts templates, but not just templates, but examples of good ones. And so we'll look for those as well.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
feel like I already looked, but I'm not sure.
I looked and could not find an example, but that may be operator error instead of it not being there. So, but I am willing to bet that before January, there will be an example that's up there.
Yeah, there is. This is all sort of it's real time, it's coming real time. So
yeah, it seems like on the website you can find the requirements that it should be the information that it should be it should include in the data management the sharing plan. So I think there's the information there on the NIH website.
And another thing a question I have, and so I obviously it's still a work in progress. And so we'll have to work internally, because when NIH says that you can include costs beyond the project period, I don't know how we're able to do that. So, so that's one of the questions that we'll be asking our colleagues, and I can guarantee it will come up on the Research Administration listserv. How do you include those costs after the project period ends? And I will say that NSF already had that as allowable costs. So people have been doing it for a while, or, at least they have taken this into consideration.
yeah.
I think, at least to my knowledge, and the NSF I know, is that what you do is you buy 10 years in advance.
Right.
And you buy a long-term contract that might not have been allowable because your grant ends, September 30th in 2023. But what will happen, my understanding, and actually if Bianca is here, she may be able to speak to this, but there's also the problem that when your grant is up, your index disappears. So you can't say, I've got 10 years of money and then hope with your grant that in 2025, there's going to be an index to which you can charge that cost. Bianca?
Right. So as soon as the grant ends, the index, it's inactivated. So that also puts a prepaid expense on the index possible. So we'll have to kind of understand what would be allowable, what those expenses are, and if are we paying them ahead of time, having a conversation with accounting too, that how are we going to handle those as prepaid expenses instead of, or do we incur them at the end of the grant? So it'll be good to understand what those guidances are.
So was there any explanation of, let's say you have a huge amount of data, RNA-seq data, whatever, from active R01, but then you lose that and it's just gone. Okay, so what is the plan under those circumstances? Does the federal government still require the institution to share that data when desired, even though there's no new funding or the investigator retires, for example? What happens to that under those circumstances?
Becky or Dr. German, you want to take that?
So I think my understanding is that if it's a current award and the PI retires, while we may want to keep that data, here, we're not required to share that data with the greater research community. I'm not saying that that wouldn't be a good idea. Everyone I think is welcome to do that, but I don't think anything funded prior to the submission date of January 25th are required to include, to save that data to be shared.
Well,
that
no, I
your
mean,
understanding?
let's say after the 23rd, when you're now responsible for that plan, and then the person retires, a few years later, what do we do with that data? And are we still responsible for sharing that data? This would be like for a new R01 in
Okay, yeah.
20, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, go on, Becky.
No, that's all right. So my understanding right now, and once again, we're still stumbling along, but my understanding is based on the request for proposals, that it may be a very long time that we have to maintain that data. And some seem, I have read, it seems to be in perpetuity, but so yes, so we would be required to do that.
Okay.
Becky, I don't think it's in perpetuity because right now I have a former NEOMED researcher's lab notebook sitting in my office here. And legal is figuring out what our responsibility is to those. It is not in perpetuity, and it may be either 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. Because of the comment Becky made about saving data even after the PI is gone. In big institutions, the data saved in big repositories that university or research institute has, and this process goes automatically, data backup, like what OneDrive that we have. So are we going to have something similar here? When we have a big data set that we can save this data, and even if PI is not here anymore, the data is there, and it will be accessible through the university. Right now, we have a limited iCloud space where we can save some data, and in order to find a solution, we have our own storages, like multiple of them, which is not the best way of doing it. But is there any plan in the future to have a bigger iCloud to save this data?
So I don't know if you want me to jump in here, Angelina, but this is where we're working with the library right now, because at most institutions, that storage is managed by the library. And so we're not, of course, there are some repositories that you just pay to maintain the data. And those are outside of our institution. And then if, so I don't know if Terry wants to jump in here now, or she's still, it's one of those things that she's still working on how we are going to maintain this data.
And the data could be a significant size depending on the researcher. I mean, if we're doing imaging studies, you can start getting into terabytes pretty quickly.
Let me just say, as someone who has a terabyte per experiment, neither IT nor the library is prepared to support that, and you'll have to come up with your own solution. I've got 20 terabytes of data, and nobody's out there helping.
Yeah. I just want to speak to that, and thank you,
Terry.
Dr. Yes, Dr. German. Actually, I don't feel right now that myself or the reference librarian, Dr. Harrell, are knowledgeable enough to speak to this, but I will say what we are doing. Angelina and Rebecca did reach out to us to explore some options about a database, which, we're doing, and we will share with them. I think it's going to take a collaboration to figure out next steps. But at this point, I would say, I know in my role, I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak to that, but there are some options to consider. And I think it's just going to take time. And hopefully everybody understands that.
So my I mean, we've brought up different kinds of data, et cetera. And on the one hand, we have, our raw data, which is massive, enormous, or can be massive, enormous, and requires those terabytes. And on the other hand, we have what's required by the NIH. And it's my understanding that those are not the same. Is that your sense, Angela or Rebecca or Becky? I mean, when we're required to put things in data repositories, it's kind of analyzed data, or is it raw data, or what?
It's a good
That-
question.
Yeah, that is a good question. That is a good question.
So I can talk about my experience with depositing RNA-seq data to the geo database with NCDI. It is raw data, very big. Yeah.
But I have the same question actually, and wondering because see what Jeff was referring to, like for instance, we are recording the activity of neurons and we only interested on the spike when it occurs. This is the 1 pixel of data. If we will record the entire trace, we don't need it. So to identify, it will be enormous data if you recorded every raw recording trace. But so it's probably up to the researcher to decide at what raw data means. So
No, I'd be very careful about that. I think Yan Chao is correct. The raw data that he submitted, basically, most people are not necessarily interested in. They're interested in the pathway analysis, the gene expression levels, or whatever. The raw data is really nitty gritty, and so we really, Alex, you need to look into that. Make sure that raw data is not necessary or not part of the plan versus your massaged results. Okay, because we could just
Angelo, stop.
Okay.
That is absolutely field dependent. It is very different in different things. For people who are doing gene sequencing, it absolutely has to be, and all the gene data banks are absolutely the most rawest of the raw data.
Right.
There are other people who only want the data you've extracted. There are journals that said you must provide people with raw data so they can look at your data, analyze it, and see that they came up with the same results. So saying something you've already extracted. It is field dependent, and unfortunately, each of us will have to stay on top of what our fields require of us. I think there is, and it's been brought up, there are 2 very important different things. There's one, what we need to do to make NIH happy and what's required of the grant submissions, and everybody needs to be on top of that. Then there's the personal decision that each researcher must make of how they care about backing up their data. And maybe some people, I do images and extract numbers from images. It's easy to keep backups of those, but I want to keep backups of all the images because I may want to take something else from them. I think each person has to decide what's important. Terry, I really appreciate your honesty about that. And it's very good to know that we've got support. But in the end, this is something that falls on the shoulders of the PIs. And PIs feel they need help in dealing with it. That's one thing. But Becky's office, in terms of NIH, is only responsible for making sure that we've got what NIH requires. Everybody has to make sure that you are taking care of your own data.
Now, let me ask this question, please. We have been doing this as a part of our publication process because this requires for omics data set. So what I'm trying to figure out, what new we have to do, make sure that we are doing everything that NIH requires.
I think that's partly of what was in the presentation. And I think you may already be doing what is sufficient for NIH. You just have to put it into a document for them. I know I don't do because I have a private backup for mine, and I have to find some place where I can put all this data. So you make people who are doing genetic data have been doing this for 10 to 20 years already. They're okay. They just write down, I put my stuff in gene bank. Okay, guys, it's there. Here's the list of what I got there. But other people who've not done that are going to have to find where they're going to do it. And in those NIH documents, in those NIH notices are the description of what they're expecting. I think it will be easier for all of us when they actually put some examples up on the web.
There's another.
Sorry, this is Priya. Just following up on that. So basically, if we are generating like Western blots or qPCR data and immunofluorescence images and stuff, so all of that now is required to be put into some repository. Is that correct? Is that what we are getting at, essentially?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Like I know there are a
essentially-
lot of repositories like Figshare and things like that, and I know in my grant submissions, I have put those down as a part of data plan, but I have actually never submitted my data in those repositories. But now it sounds like that is something that we need to do, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So that's that follow-up. So, when you submit for your grants beginning in January 25th, 2023, any submissions after that, you'll have to put, to paper what your plan for that data management is and how you're going to manage that data, where it's going to go. You're going to talk about that repository. If you get selected for funding, that plan will be ultimately reviewed and approved. If changes are needed, that's when that negotiation or something changes on your end, that's where that negotiation will happen in the just in time. Something to note, and I don't think I mentioned this during the presentation, is that if your DMS plan changes, that will require prior approval. So you'll need to get that approval for that. So if you want to change this repository or change anything, that will require that prior approval.
So, I'm sorry, Jeff.
There's a couple of questions that arise. One has to do with code, computer code. And, there's one thing if the code is actually developed in the process of an NIH funding, but another thing is if the code exists and may be protected in some way by patent or whatever, what are we required to show all those kinds of code? And it's just the kind of code that are utilized in data analysis rather than data generation. And they're really quite different kinds of code.
Yeah, so from my understanding is that if there are proprietary protections issues, those things you would be protected under that. So that coding would be protected.
Okay.
And that's something that you would include in your data management storage plan as part of your proposal.
Okay.
Would it be fair to say that your depository of the data should be in the format which will allow somebody in the future, not you, reanalyzing your data? Is that correct?
Can you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, thank you.
So the data should be stored in the way which will allow anybody to have access to the data to reanalyze it and get the same results as you did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And that might require that they buy the software that is used to analyze that.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Now you're getting it. Yeah.
Okay.
So is there any time, so a lot of times when we generate data sets, we use them for multiple publications, right? So we're work on one and we finish that one, and then we work on additional aspects of that data set prior to, for the next publication. Is there any time dimension here that that we can essentially be working on our next paper prior to distributing that out to a broader database?
I can tell you what it was for NSF,
Yeah.
that yes, that you didn't have to share that data and make it publicly available until you were done using it for your, your publications and things like that.
Okay.
And so we'll have to see what, and if NIH answers that question.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would say that's what Becky said. I think and that's really where in that plan, the DMS, you're going to talk about your timelines and all of that. And I'm sure there will be feedback. If they don't deem that as acceptable, they will let you know. That's not an acceptable timeline. So they'll be pretty honest with you about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if NSF really, I might be a little biased to NSF. I love the NSF. I would love to see us increase our NSF funding. And they really do a great job at sort of providing, the guidance, but they've sort of been ahead of the curve with a lot of different things. So you might want to look at the NSF, and there's some of their templates and things that they have, because there might be some things out there that you could use that would be acceptable for NIH.
Thanks.
There's also a data use agreement which provides limitations to on the users for that data. So perhaps if you're not ready to share the full data, you could put those limitations in that data, limiting what the users see.
Okay.
Thank you, Bianca, for talking about that, because that comes up really as well when you talk about subcontracts. So when you have subs on there as well, and all of this flows down to subs. So that's a whole nother topic of conversation, is subcontracting and those implications and what that has to do with data management as well. So those are conversations that you'll want to think about and consider and have with your collaborators if you plan on having subcontracts on your NIH grants. And Dr. Wenstrup, did we answer all your questions? Because at the beginning you did say that you had some questions.
No, I think those were the ones that I brought up. I think were the ones. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
And Jonathan Wagner's been silent, but he might have some information that he could share about our IT side, which of course is going to have to be involved in this whole thing.
We're not hearing.
We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, technology, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate the opportunity. So we recently with an IT reorganized a bit, and in my current role now, I'm trying to look at gaps, institutional gaps. And I guess I'll be transparent, from what I have gleaned over the years, and the way IT has really functioned and interacted with research specifically has been poor. And so there are things that we're looking to try to address, personally speaking, trying to address to foster those relationships and really understand how we can better support the research enterprise here at the university, which will be a very large learning experience for a lot of us, because the typical response has been, it's not us, which is unfortunate because it really hinders the activities here at the university and what we can really do. So to the comment around data repositories and backups specifically, there are so many, like Angela had mentioned, I can speak for a long time about backups and how things are interlinked and some of the consequences in which the ways in which we're currently operating, but there are some things that we need to do. Trying to better understand, so I'm not going to eat up a lot of time here. There's going to be a lot of questions that I have that I want to try to better understand how things operate in respect to data, because there are some things from a regulatory standpoint that we have to accommodate. There are a lot of things that we're going to have to do at the university exclusively outside of research in regards to privacy and security controls that may also relate to and benefit some of the things from your perspective that you'll need to do from a research perspective. One of the comments as of late has been trying to establish regulated environments in which to conduct activities, whether it's research, whether it's healthcare related operations, et cetera. And so as a part of that, there may be some things that we implement as a university that will also support what you all are looking to do in respect to data management at large, whether we're talking about data retention, archival, backups, et cetera. I know folks do a little bit of different things. And so what we're trying to do is better understand those activities and try to come up with a way. I do not have the purse strings in that respect, but it really makes a lot of sense from an institutional perspective to support institutionally the work that is being done from a research perspective and seeing how institutional dollars and grant dollars can work together to help facilitate some of the stuff that we may need to hold on to. We have a records management or records retention policy that speaks to some research data, intellectual property, et cetera, but there's a lot of other things in respect to the true business need to holding on to data, institutional need, et cetera, and how do we facilitate that when we talk about some of these scenarios in which, you know, if data is needed for users to access the data in the same manner in which it was originally accessed using the same software, how can we facilitate that institutionally to kind of help decentralize activities? So it is just a long way to reiterate, there's a lot internally here that we could be doing better, and we want to do better in that respect. And so I appreciate your assistance to kind of better understand how things are currently working and how can we help you work better in respect to what you do. So,
well, we'll definitely include you in these conversations moving forward.
Much appreciated.
And, as we're trying to figure out how, as an institution, we're going to better manage this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was on a webinar, and I can't remember the institution now, but what their IT was doing in terms of just managing data and information. I was like, I was in the webinar, and I think at one point I was like, everything just went over my head because I was like, whoa. I was like scared, like we're not even doing anything. And I've never been at an institution where they were doing that. I can't remember. It might be University of Central Florida, but there are some institutions that they're doing some just amazing things and working really collaboratively. IT is working really collaboratively with, you know, their research and sponsored programs.
For sure. And, you know, that is definitely a gap that I have seen and want to try to close, you know, as the university continues to expand. This is something where we really need to be a facilitator and not an inhibitor. So there's a lot to do in respect to this particular topic, but I appreciate the time.
Yeah, not a problem. So we are coming up, we've just got 2 minutes left. And I'm glad that I thought I'd be able to give a little bit of your time back, but everyone came prepared with questions, and this has been great. Did anyone have any last minute questions or anything that wasn't addressed that you would like addressed now? I don't know, Dr. German, are you still on? Did you want to say anything? Okay, well, again, if you need any assistance, we are here to assist you. Hold on, give me 1 second here. Their information, I was going to put the information, let me just go. But we are here to assist you. You know, Rebecca Hayes, the executive director. You can reach out to myself, or you can reach out to, you know, our sponsored programs general email. If you have any questions, you can always come down and visit us as well, but we will send you these slides. And again, our contact information will be there. And as soon as this recording is available, we'll send that back out as well. So thank you again, everybody. I hope you took away some, information. You took what you needed. And again, do not hesitate to reach out. We're here to support you. We want you to be successful in your research endeavors. Thank you. Have a good day.